All right, good afternoon. Everybody's still here. I saw some people sleeping during the introduction, so it looks like you're all having a long day. So this class is in creating intelligent details in Revit. I'm Brian Mackey. I've been working with Revit since 2004, so it's been a while that I've been working with Revit. I think last year I officially started working with Revit longer than I'd been using AutoCAD, so yay. That's a good thing. So this session, we're going to get into creating intelligent details. And by that, I actually mean we're going to be using detail components. So we're going to talk about how to create intelligent detail components and make them usable for every day. And I will not be offended. This session is not going to be talking about 3D modeling, flashing, et cetera, things like that. So if that's what you guys were here for, feel free to get up and walk away, go hopefully find a class where the fire marshals aren't letting you stand in the back. Another thing about my sessions is I really like to make these interactive. So if you guys have questions, feel free to ask them along the way. There are microphones in the middle, especially since I really can't see if hands come up or anything. But feel free to jump in. I like to make this interactive, ask questions along the way. Plus, I'm probably not going to remember what I said at the end of the session. So if you ask the questions at the end, I'll be like, wait, what did I say? So we'll just jump ahead with that. Also, if you like this kind of theory, I do have 2 classes tomorrow on talking about linking details into like a campus-type project. So if you're interested in any of those sessions, I do have those tomorrow too. So there's my shameless plug for the day. All right, so I'm going to start off with a survey. How many people in here are architects? Engineers? All right, engineers, but let me bounce that back. Structural engineers, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. All right, so this does work for anything, but just for the examples of I don't really have too many MEP details that I'm going to be talking about, but the concepts are going to be true. I did try to join this with architectural and structural. So the topics, the discussion, my examples are mostly going to be structural and architectural. So sorry, MEP guys, I don't detail in MEP, never have, so I didn't want to look like a complete idiot by attempting to put something up there I know nothing about. So, all right, so next thing, when everybody in here is detailing, how many people in here are doing details and the majority using text in their details and they're doing details? Okay, it's very common, so it's not a big thing. How many people are actually using keynote tagging? So if we're doing details, you're keynote tagging. And anybody in here using like element tags, type comments, etc.? Okay, so it looks like we're split between text and keynoting in here. So the other thing about that I always like to find out is how many people are using detail lines and filled regions for the majority of their details. Okay, how many people are using kind of like a mix, mostly detail items, but still a lot of lines and text, things like that? Okay, so for me, or the last example, how many people are importing AutoCAD and exploding it? Okay, you're really in the right session, so do not leave. So for me, I have a theory on best practices for doing details. And a lot of people look at me like I'm a little bit crazy when I start this. And it's funny, I showed this to a client I think it was about 2006. They were making this great effort switching from AutoCAD. Like, look, we've created all of our AutoCAD details into Revit. And there wasn't a single detail component. It was all lines. It was all filled regions, masking regions, and text. And I was like, that's great. How long have you been working on this? Like 4 months. I'm like, you did it all wrong. So my theory on this is when I'm creating details, the biggest thing for me and the best practices of a detail is to use all Revit detail components with tagging. So by that, what I actually mean is, since we said most people are using keynoting, I'm going to open up the sample file here, that when you start looking at this detail here, there is not a single piece of text. There is not a single line. For me, when I talk about intelligent details, I'm going to be starting to come through and be doing things like detail components. So as I start to cruise through here, you'll see that, yes, this is a detail component. This is strictly a drafting view I'm displaying right here. But detail components for the objects, including even the fact that I've got a detail component that looks like a line to be whatever I want that to be. There's 2 reasons why I do this. One, how many people get into their details where it's line, and Joe uses pin 5, and Fred uses pin 7, and Jennifer just uses an invisible line. We have no idea why. And that's what we're drawing these details out of. So when we start looking at that, it's more to gain the consistency in there, as well as the fact that now when I start coming down here and I get into a project and somebody's like, in this project, I really wanted you to come through here and change all of the text from building wrap to be 20-pound felt paper or whatever it might be. I'm dating that detail there. So it's building wrap. So rather than coming in here and changing the text in 500 different locations, I could do a select all instances in this view in the entire project, change it from building wrap, I should have opened this earlier, to something different, like grade D building paper. And the second I change that line, I now get it called grade D building paper. Okay? So being able to change those components to get the text to update. How many people in here for the architectural side of things can't spell gypsum board the same way consistently in their office? No one? I'm the only one, right? How many structural engineers can't spell cast-in-place concrete the same way? CIP, C period, I period, right? So the other thing about doing this too is it's really to gain that consistency, not only in line weight, but the way we're either going to be tagging these or the way we're going to be annotating them. So that's kind of the big thing for me. Now, personally, I noticed most people in here raise their hand saying, hey, they use keynoting. I'm not as big of a fan tagging using the keynote values. I'm more of a fan tagging these using the type comments, and I'll show you why here. So this one is example using keynotes. Now, you can switch your keynote tag out if you don't like the numbers. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't like the numbers. You can get rid of your keynote to have text only. I have several clients who do that. You can have it have both, or I have some clients who do only the keynote numbers. But the problem I have is Autodesk has keynoting locked down. So if I wanted to come in here and add an additional piece of text to this, I cannot. So the bigger thing for me, my personal opinion, I'm not saying there's a right or wrong here, but my personal opinion on that same type of component is I really like to tag it with type comments, because then I can come in here and it says building wrap, and then in this place, as a terrible example, I could say as weep screed or something like that. I can come in here and add additional text to it. That is something you don't get from keynoting. So my personal opinion is I like doing type comments because then I can add additional types of tags, or you can do custom tagging parameters, whatever. But with keynoting, it's kind of locked down to the number and the text. So I have had some clients who are like, yeah, we want to do keynoting. And then they start working in their detail file, and then they start adding text at the end of their keynotes, which in my mind is almost as bad as just doing text in the first place. So that's kind of thing for me. So when I talk about creating consistent, intelligent details or doing these detailings with best practices, that's kind of what I start meaning, is using mostly intelligent detail components, if not all, and then getting into things like tagging those objects. The other thing that I like to do inside of there, and this project isn't set up that way, but a lot of times I'll want to use the same detail component, but I want that detail component possibly to be half-toned, because I might be saying like beyond or something like that. So a lot of times I'll have filters built into my visibility to say, hey, anytime any of these components has the beyond in the comments, half-tone it. So building some more intelligence like that, so when it's something beyond, again, I don't have everybody right-click, override graphics and views. I want to use color 250 whatever, and I want to use color white. I want to use color purple. So gaining that consistency with filters based on maybe a property somebody puts in there as well. So those are kind of some of the things that I intend to be best practices when I start looking at it. So let's talk about starting to set a detail, in my mind, what a good drafting view is. Where did this black square come from? I was playing around yesterday. So when I start looking at this file, you'll also notice that I've got this nice little box going around it. Anybody use some sort of detailing guide like this? Yeah, a few people. So for those of you who don't know what this detailing guide is a generic annotation family. In the handout, it's got I think in this handout, it's got a plug into my website. You can download this if you want. But when I go to start doing a detail, or heck, if I'm doing a wall section or even a floor plan, how big is this view going to be when I place it on a sheet? This is kind of my biggest thing. So you'll see that I actually have this detail guide set up where I can say, hey, if I'm using 4 columns and 3 rows, or 2 columns and 3 rows, or 4 columns and 2 rows, how much space do I have when this view is drug onto a sheet? And all this is a very simple generic annotation family that if I go to the type properties, gives me properties for sheet width, height, and how big the borders are on the 4 sides of my page. And then I go up there and tell it how many columns are going to be there, 2, 4, etc., those types of scenarios. So in my mind, this is one of the really great things, is if you start with a little detail guide, I call it, it lets you know how large that needs to be on the sheet. I use these for everything in Revit, not just detail views. I'll have one on a real project that's 1 column by 1 row. So therefore, when I'm working on a floor plan or something, I just drop this on the floor plan, and it shows me how big my floor plan needs to be. So I'm not doing the back and forth. Let me drag it onto a sheet, change a crop region, switch back and forth between the view, deactivate view. Oh, does it fit? Move it around. I use this little guide just to show me how big this layout is going to be. And again, this is set up, this was mostly set up for my structural engineers in mind, where you can actually just plug down what the architect has for their borders on the top, right, left, bottom, etc. Okay, so that's kind of my theory, and that's where I start. So you'll also see that for me, in my project template, I have a drafting view template. So I always have one little view inside of a drafting view that basically just gives everybody a starting point of, hey, here's a detail guide for you. I also, behind the scenes, have reference planes in that drafting view to match the size of the detail guide. Now, if this is a drafting view, this works great. And the reason why I do this is I can take this and use those reference planes to align things on a sheet. Right? We all like the Holy Grail. Align things on the sheet. Yay! So if you embed reference planes into your views like this, if I were to just go ahead and open up one of the sheets here, I can then take that view, drag it onto the sheet, and since there's reference planes hiding inside of there, I can just move those, snap to the reference plane, snap to the reference planes in my other one, and really start to line these things up on the sheet a little bit easier. So for me, my template already has, my drafting view template, has that inside of there with those reference planes kind of hiding behind the scenes. The other reason is, for anybody who's ever been in one of my sessions, I kind of have a type A personality. I also set that up to come into 0, 0. So this is the 0 plane in the Y, and this is the 0 plane in the X. So if I ever were to export this out to AutoCAD or any other utility, I'd know it's going out to 0, 0. So there's another reason behind the scene, more because it's my type A personality, but it is nice to have it snap on the sheets as well. Okay? So that's where I start in a view. If I get over to a view, I kind of start with what that's going to be. I start with this detail. Now, when I start then going to detail, it again, like I said, is going to be 100% detail components. So when we start talking about those detail components, naming conventions become key. Right? How many people have been in their project and realized they had 5 different detail components that were all one thing? They were just 6 different names. Yes, I had 5 components with 6 different names. Right? So you have that. So to me, one of the things when you're getting into the best practices too is really starting to come up with some sort of naming convention. Most of my clients like to use CSI. If you are using CSI, I always suggest using the first 3 characters. I know a lot of people just like division 5, like 0, 5. But if you add that 3rd character for CSI, it'll start grouping the things together that become a little bit closer. Like all cold form metal is 0, 5, 4. All structural metal is 0, 5, whatever. So it just really starts to come through. That's my personal opinion. The other thing about this, I know people are like, it's not a big deal. You do have the search, and that is true, but I just really like to have this stuff grouped together and grouped together accordingly. So that's kind of one of those things for me. So then when I get starting, like I said, if this is going to be completely a drafting view, when I come in here, you'll start to see I have detail components for everything, including in the example you saw I had brick. I have an airspace detail component. The detail component has invisible lines inside of it, but the reason why I have this airspace detail component is because I want to be able to tag out the airspace. So it looks kind of weird, there's nothing there, but it is a detail component still to be able to tag something out. So really getting into those detail components, those views, what do you need to start doing in there? All of this is also true if I'm placing it over the model. So I've got this highly advanced 3D model here. This took me weeks to create. And what about this detail model is I tend to model in a pretty high level of detail, but I'm still going to have to embellish those views anyway. So if I were to go cut a section through that view, you can see that even in this view, I still have I'm still going to have to come back and annotate over it. Right? So you can see, yeah, I even modeled my brick going down where it needed to be, but I can't get the sheathing and the air gap to stop independent of where the brick is. So this is kind of one of those things to me where I would be coming here and saying, oh, gee, I know I'm going to have a 2-inch airspace. If you guys didn't, does everybody know you can actually drag and drop from the project browser to place a component? Okay, I did this in one session last year. And I was like, what did you just do to have that happen? It's like, oh, I just dragged and dropped from the component. So I drag and drop from there. I can come in here. You can see I'm placing this object. I also do a lot of line-based detail components. So you'll start to see like my little air gap is a line-based detail component. If I wanted to come in here and do some sort of like gypsum wall board, let me scroll down. I don't have too many families in here. Normally I'm using search, but since inside of here I don't have a ton of detail components and you guys get crazy scrolling through the detail components? Who else wanted to applaud Autodesk when they gave us the search tool up here? Did you guys all know you have the search tool? And of course, it's right there. So anybody know you can just search in here? Does everybody also know that where you right-click in the project browser is where the search starts? So I just wanted to point that out because I always see people like going to the project browser and right-clicking at the very top and saying, oh, I want to search. And then they're searching through annotation tags. And you're getting all the 15 annotation tags for rooms or whatever you want to do. So for me, I'm going to always right-click where I need to, hit the search, hit my little gyp, and then it comes down here and tells me, hey, gee, here's my gypsum board section. So once I come down here, you can see I've got this inside of here. I like to embed into those objects a little bit more intelligence. So what you'll see inside of here was I start building on top of this is, so I've got this gypsum board detail component. I like to add additional components. And this is kind of where we're getting to that other intelligent level of detail, right? Architects in the room, you like the fat line on the outside? Yes? Again, how many times do you have people consistently putting the same fat line in your object? So inside of here, I have a little checkbox. I want that exterior face line or the fat line on that gypsum board. But if I were to have two pieces of gypsum board, I don't really want the fat line on that first piece of gypsum board. So I can come in here and turn that line on and off. So again, embedding some of that intelligence to make this stuff a little bit better. Well, what if I wanted to come in here and I was like at an inside corner with the same piece of gypsum board? Spacebar to rotate, or to flip, I should say. I'm coming in here going, oh my God, that just looks terrible. I want the fat line, but I didn't want this to happen. I also like to embed angles at the beginning of all my line-based detail components. So I can start coming in and saying, well, gee, I know it's not going to be mitered here, but graphically, I don't like the little nub here. Graphically over there, I want it to look a little bit, oops, that would be a negative. I want this to be set up a little bit different, okay? Then I also embed into some of these components things like, gee, is there going to be a start line inside of there? Do I want to see the little line on those objects? So now using that same detail component, I can get that consistent fat line. I can also turn that stuff off just to get that graphic look I'm looking for. So trying to embed some of those things that you're looking for inside of there. The other thing on that is if I go back into this view here, I also like to, for my structural engineers in the room, start embedding a little bit more information. I like to create a lot of detail components that automatically have an array into them. Because anybody here use a repeating detail component in Revit? It's a really great tool, but you can't tag it, you can't keynote it. You can't tab select to get to the detail component to tag that or keynote that, okay? There is an Autodesk wish list item on that, so if you go to the Revit ideas, there is one. I put it in the handout or the PowerPoint, I think, because I really want that one voted up. About 200 people here and people online, vote that one up. So things like that is I rarely use the repeating detail component because of that reason. So for me, unlike structural engineers here, I got tired of trying to place this an inch and a half from the edge. So when I were to go start placing this detail component, I just click on the edge. I'm going to do it at the bottom here again. I click on the edge, and I go through there, and it's putting that in there automatically for me. It'll also then, I added cover distance. Well, gee, that should have been 3 inches, not 1.5 inches. I can change the cover distance to move that around. So I'm not trying to place the component and move and nudge and shift it around to get it close. I'm embedding that information inside of there. You'll also see that I've got a spacing parameter in here. So if I were to go change the spacing, I can actually get it to just change the repeating what I want it to be. I have one that has quantity, I have one that has spacing, depending on what you're looking for. The other thing about that is I like to take those parameters are also shared parameters because I want to be able to tag that intelligence, right? So I can come in here and say, I've got this number 6 at 1'6" on center. Oh no, that should have been 12 inches on center. I'll type in my 12 inches, say okay, and now boom, my component's updated as well. So linking that data to the object so I can start going through and manipulating it back and forth, okay? The other thing I always like to show people here is like I do have this as my nice little like dashed line sitting here. This one I did not create a separate component for because there's a little tip that a lot of people don't know that you can do. If you have a detail component like this one, you can actually override the graphics in the view and make change the line weights on the elements. Usually I take that. For this particular client, they were architects, they didn't want it. Structural engineers, I wouldn't suggest, but they wanted to do this. So I usually, in my other reinforcing bar, I have alternate sides, so it automatically add the dashes to the other side. But in this case, I literally just came in here and said override graphics and view on this element, and then you can make it half-toned, you can make the projection lines dashed, etc. The other thing that you can do if you didn't want to do that is I am going to send this to the back, because I can actually send that to the back. And then I'm going to come down here and go into wireframe. Be a little crazy here, but how many people in here actually use on the view tab the show hidden? People use this? This is like a very underutilized tool. I only see about 10 hands going up here. So this show hidden lines allows you to say, hey, and if we're looking at the status bar down there, pick the element you want to see the hidden lines through. I want to see hidden lines through this element, and this is the element I want it to be hidden. Then if I go back to hidden lines, it'll show that object is dashed. So you can use it for modeled objects, where I use it a lot for, but you can also use that for detail components too. So I don't usually do a whole lot of the right-click overriding. If I need to see something dashed like this, I just put the same component in, and in that component, I just use the show hidden. Okay? So it's just really getting in here and starting to think about how can we build those detail components, how can we embed intelligence to them. How can we make them, in my mind, I have a lot of clients who disagree with this, but how can we also make them very universal? So if we start looking at this detail as well, like this little keyway, this is a separate family put on top of everything else. And the only reason why I have that keyway as a separate family is because this piece of concrete, and this piece of concrete, and this piece of concrete, all the same component. So I try to use very vague terms personally for me because I don't want to load 600 families. I try to use very generic families that will allow me to do this. So if I start coming in here and looking at this 030 concrete, it's very generic. I don't have it specific to sidewalks or slabs. And then it's just editing, duplicating the type, and generating different sizes for it. And then in a case like this, again, since I have the capability to turn like the end line and start line off, I literally just put a 12-inch wall here, or in this case, a 10-inch wall, and then a 6-inch wall on top of it to generate my little step. So I don't go through and try to create one that has a step, one that doesn't have a step. I also, a lot of times, don't embed chamfers where I need to occasionally see them. It's just another component like this keyway component I just simply put over the top. So a lot of people disagree with me on that. They want very specific families, but you can go either route on that, starting to get in there and start looking at it. Okay? Then the other thing I like to do for my intelligent details is you can actually nest components into components. So who here does family nesting? Okay? So when I start looking at this scenario here, this little piece of brick has a checkbox for not mortar visibility, weep vent. So every single one of my bricks, if I decided that I didn't want it in this brick, I wanted it in this brick or whatever, have that capability to check the weep vent. Now that little weep vent family is a nested family that has also been shared. So that way I can still come up here and grab my tag command. And then when I tag, I might have to use the tab key to get to the weep vent. Okay? So nesting components into other components becomes very beneficial, especially the fact that if you're going to use that component in multiple locations. So I use that weep vent on my CMU and my notched brick component, etc., to be able to do that. So creating those components to get them nested in for that same tagging scenario as well. Okay? So just a lot of things that you can really start building in to make these intelligent. And I didn't put this one in the handout. I actually forgot about putting this in the handout, which I can't believe because I actually taught a session on this. I'm going to do a little tile view here. So the one way you can take these details and make them one step more intelligent, let me just come back up here to this 3D view real quick. Let me tile these up. Is you can also start associating global parameters, possibly from the 3D model, as well as to the 2D components. And I taught a whole session at this at a different conference earlier this year, where I can come up here and go manage my global parameters, go into them, and I only have one in here, but hey, gee, I want that slab edge to be 2 inches. And then when I go ahead and hit OK, I'm taking that 3D model object and moving it, and I'm probably in the one view I didn't get that associated to. I'm going to go back to this one. And getting this one, which it went the wrong direction, so I screwed that up, and getting this one to update with it as well. So the thing about global parameters is a lot of people have been talking about linking those to 3D objects, which is great, but think about linking those global parameters to the 3D object as well as your detail to really start adding some intelligence between your 2D and your 3D information also. So that's something else to be thinking about. And I didn't put that one in the handout. It actually dawned on me last night. It's like, why didn't I do that? So that's kind of a little impromptu thing I threw in here. So associating global parameters to your components can make those intelligent as well. Okay? And then last but not least, like I did say, I talked about placing on sheets. Let's talk about like then annotating the details. I personally like to detail a lot. I can't stand annotating details. But what becomes being really, really nice about this stuff, like I said, is now since it's all based on intelligent tagging, I'm going to come down here and just start tagging these objects. Go into a free end leader here. So now I can just come in here and start saying, gee, here's my unit masonry. I'm going to do the drafting nightmare of crisscrossing my detail lines here. Yeah, don't do that. But just being able to come through here now and start tagging this information, going through that information, and now it's just a tag. I'm getting consistency naming, and I've got the tag there. Like I said, for me in this view, this is going to be using type comments, but I also like to come through here and do it that way because if I needed to add additional information, my tag has type comments / comments in the tag itself. So now I can come in here and say at wet locations, use cementuous. Sure, you get it. I'm probably spelling this wrong. Board. right? So I can add a piece of comment where the type comment up at the top is still going to be there, but I can add additional information to it. So rather than having to constantly duplicate a detail component for one little additional piece of text, as long as I'm tagging it, I can add additional information via comments. A lot of my clients, we've actually added parameters called prefix and suffix, because sometimes they want to add it before as opposed to after. So just getting that information set up that way as well is going to work great. Okay? So questions on any of the detailing? Yeah, question? Did they fix the leader location on these? So the question is, have they fixed leader location on tags? Yes, they fixed them to be right in the middle. So they are fixed location. I don't think that's the way you meant on that question. No, your tags still have fixed location on them. So yeah, that is. I have a lot of people who do disagree with that, like, oh, I don't use tagging because I want the tag to be here or there. My response to that has always been, have you ever been sued because the leader location is in the wrong place, or have you been sued because you had the wrong data? That's just my response to that question. I agree, I don't like it, type A personality, but it is what it is, and I'd rather have correct information than a pretty leader. Okay, any other questions before I move on? Okay, yes, another one back there. I do use elements from the model, so if we come back here to this file, it depends on the team I'm working with. So your question was, do we use elements from the model? Well, it depends on the team I'm working with. When I'm working by myself, I've actually recently done my in-laws' house. I 3D modeled everything. My wife thought I was crazy. She's a structural engineer. She used Revit. She thought I was crazy. I modeled everything. I modeled all the reinforcement in 3D. I did everything, because for me, it's just as easy to do it in 3D and tag it as it is to just do a 2D detail component. But if I were to do all that 3D stuff and I had a not-so-savvy Revit user on my team, they will screw it up. So it's a given they'll screw it up. So it depends on the team and the team you trust. But what you will see here is, yes, I will come in here, and in this case, my structural framing families, I added the X to it, as most people have done for their wood stuff. So for me, if that was the case, I would just use this, and my element tag, it might be a different tag, but my element tag, and I don't think this file's got it set up, but my element tag would truly be pulling out same thing, type comments for the 3D family, as well as that. And this is also why a lot of my other clients go through and they start using custom parameters, call it tag 1, tag 2, tag 3, as opposed to type comments and comments. The only thing I will say if you use custom shared parameters, if they are nested, you can't tab select and add a comment to it. And so this is a nuance. If I come back here to this one, so the one that says like weep vent, I can still tab select that and comments comes up here. So I can tab select and get comments, but if it's a shared parameter and you tab select it, that parameter is grayed out. So just do be aware of that if you are going to be doing your own custom parameters for there. Okay? But yes, the other critical thing that if you are doing this is going through and verifying that your 3D model line weights match your detail item line weights. This becomes very, very critical when you're looking at it. So if I were to come down here and grab like a 2x4, 0.6, nominal cut lumber, where am I? Section. So if I come down here and put like a 2x6 down here or something, you'll notice that my line weights are the same. That's not out of the box. That does not happen. So verifying that the things that you're cutting through in your model stuff match the line weights of your 2D stuff makes this a much easier process to where people really won't know what's 3D and what's 2D. The other tip on that is, again, wait, now I got my line weights all cool. What the heck is 3D and what's 2D in this view? Does everybody know about this tool over here for display model? Display model, you actually get an option to display the model half-toned. So now you can see as you're detailing what's truly part of the model and what have I detailed. This is something that I usually set up in my view templates to be half-toned when I start a project. So anytime somebody cuts a section or a detail, that's there. And then before I print, I switch it from half-tone to be back to display model normally. So another little tip there too. Okay, so any other questions? Yes, another question. So you can't, question is, can you have multiple leaders? You cannot. That is one of the downsides to tagging, and that's, I have a lot of structural engineers like, yeah, I'll never use that because I tag multiple things. So if I am tagging something, I cannot add, terrible example here, but maybe I wanted to call this one piece of insulation out 3 times. I cannot do that. Personally, for me, all I do is I just copy this to the clipboard, and then I do paste same place, and then now I have a second one with a second leader that I can pull out over to there. So you can't get a tag doing both. I'm like thinking it should be up, the screen should be up here, and I keep turning around. So you can't do it to both, but you can put a tag on top of a tag. Okay? So then the last thing on this, so we talked about creating the detail. One thing that really becomes nice is I get a lot of people saying that's great, but what about the additional comments somebody added in there? You told me I could, make the standard so it always says gypsum board spelt the same way, etc. But what if somebody goes in and says, oh, gee, on this I wanted to say each way, right? I'm talking reinforcing. I wanted to say each way or top and bottom. How can I manage the consistency of that? So for me, I have a working schedule in my project of detail items. I sort it by the family, the type, and then the comments. So if somebody came in here and spelled alternating, and you're like, no, gee, I wanted that to be all in all uppercase, I can come in here and do all alternating in uppercase, or spell it correctly if you misspelled it, and I can change that through a schedule. And if that was on 13 different detail components, I just updated it on all the detail components. So for me, when they added, I think it was Revit 15, the capability to schedule detail components, that made this process even that much easier and better. So now I've got this schedule here going through and setting it up. And like I said with this schedule is set up by family type, type comments, and then just comments. So therefore I can check to see, hey, am I getting standard comments as people go through? I personally always add count, so I can just start to verify how many instances of this there is in there. Downside to the schedules, the detail schedules, is it will give you the masking regions as a blank line, and you can't filter them out unless you go add like a comment to every single masking region. So you will probably have a blank line at the top, which is every single masking region in your project. Okay. So that's kind of the last thing about the detailing that I'm talking about this, really getting into that, is use that schedule to verify what's going on. Also, this is my other tip. You cannot spell check comments or type comments in Revit, but you can export this out to Excel if you have some sort of add-on utility. If you're using Dynamo, you're using BIMlink, you're using Pro Revit tools, whatever. Export it to Excel, spell check it in Excel, re-import it back in. That's your spell check. So it's not the best solution, it's not the best scenario, but you actually can do spell checking if you're exporting information out. Okay? All right. Let's talk about families. So who here has invested hours upon hours creating their own detail components? Besides me, right? This is not a small task. This is something to get going on. One thing I want to talk about is do start with the out-of-the-box families. They're not terrible. They're not as customizable as I would think, but they actually have a lot of components for you to get started on. And a lot of the components that they have out of the box are really great for if you're talking about nominal cut lumber, nominal cut things like that. So you can start with the out-of-the-box components and then just go in and start adding your own type comments or comments as you're starting to go through. The thing about doing those out-of-the-box families is they are going to be using the heavy, medium, and wide. So as you're getting started on this process, I say use those, but more than likely you're going to be taking those and customizing those to match what you need. I personally think the out-of-the-box stuff has way too fat align weights. I like them to be a little bit thinner, etc. So for me, I go in and I start tweaking the object styles. I don't want it to say medium, thin, light. I say pin 1, pin 2, pin 3, pin 4, etc. That's my personal opinion. But a lot of them started with the out-of-the-box family. So as you're going down this process, use those, get started with those, and start going into it. Oops. But if you want to get into it, let's really start talking about creating our own detail component families. So how many people in the audience have their own family templates? Okay, quite a few. This is one of the things that I don't think enough people do or get into when they start getting inside of there. You can actually create your own family templates in Revit. This is going to sound really bizarre because there's no such thing in Revit as save as. So when I do this for all my different types of family templates, I start a new Revit family, just in Revit, and then I save that Revit family to a folder once I make some settings I want. And I always save that under my templates folder to a folder called original families. So I got my template folder, and underneath there I have original families. And I save those as just the RFA. I then copy that RFA to another folder and rename it RFT. So to create any sort of family template, you just rename an RFA to an RFT. You now have a family template. So when I want to go in there and start creating my own type of family, what I end up doing in there is just going to File, New. I'll go to my family, I'll browse to my family folder, and when I start coming in here, now I can come in and start having some pre-things built inside of here. So when I start looking at my family template, I've went through and set up my own object styles. Again, I don't like the thin, medium, wide. I don't really understand what that means. I want to know, am I using pin 3, pin 4, pin 5, pin 6, pin 7, etc. So for me, I have my own object styles inside of here. Whatever you want to call them, I don't care. But I have my own object styles set up inside of this family template. I go through and set up the fill patterns that I'm going to be using in my family template. How many people have 5 different fill patterns with concrete spelt different ways? Right? Because you downloaded Joe's template, and this guy came from this firm, and he stole all their families because nobody ever does that way, right? It's totally wrong. And now you get that families in there, and then we got their object styles. You get all this craziness inside of there. So for me, getting all of this set up in your family template becomes very, very beneficial. So when anybody in my office needs a new template or a new family, they go file a new family, it's pointing them to where it is on the server, our custom templates are, and they don't know any different, but it's got all of the stuff that matches our standards. And by the way, when you do this, don't spell something wrong and then load it into 15 families. It's a pain in the butt. Okay, so have this stuff all set up as you get started. Possibly have things built inside of there too. So I'm going to go do new one more time. So you'll see that for me, just for detail components, I happen to have like detail item line based and then one called front and one called top bottom. The difference between the front, back, and the top bottom are the way it's been defined. So this automatically already has the start angle and end angle parameters I have inside of there that I like to use. This will also possibly have in there the prefix and the suffix that I like to have inside of there. Right? So I build in all those custom shared parameters that I think I'm going to be using or more than likely going to be using on the majority of those. So therefore the shared parameters are there, the tags are pre-built to look at those shared parameters, and it's all set up inside of there when I start doing this. So somebody can come in and do it. The reason why I have 3 different line-based detail components is, one, I don't want the start angle on some of them. The other ones I do. The other thing is I have some of them where the insertion point's at the back, some of them where the insertion point's at the front. So I go through and have that all pre-built up with pre-named reference planes inside of here, et cetera. So spending a little bit of time doing that, getting that set up. The other thing is, if anybody follows my blog, I actually realize who here names the reference planes? Anyone? Somebody else notice that new feature in 2018? That if you use like the dimension command or the align command, it will see the names of your reference planes in your families. Sorry, that was a new feature that I saw that my type A personality was cheering for. Yay, for the last 12 years, it's paying off. So yes, I name all my reference planes as well, and now in 2018, you can actually see those names when you're dimensioning. So what am I dimensioning to? I'm dimensioning this family, and I'm dimensioning to the front reference plane or the center line reference plane. Really becomes beneficial. So the reason why I have 3 different line-based families, when you create a Revit family template, any reference plane or dimension placed, once you rename it from an RFA to an RFT, cannot be deleted. I cannot delete that reference line. Renaming it back to an RFA still won't let me delete that reference line. So the very first time I created this really cool template, it's like, oh, I'll just put this in there. I could delete it if I don't need it. Yeah, no, I got hosed, and I didn't save the original family. So this is why you will see, that was quite a while ago. This is why you see I keep the original families. So if there's something I realize I misspelled or I don't want anymore, I have that original family to go delete it and create a new family template out of it. Okay, so that's kind of a key thing. Keep those original families in there. Side note, if you did put a dimension in there that you decided you didn't want, but you want the reference plane, so somebody used like the out-of-the-box door, I think it is, family, and there's a zero dimension from the face of the wall to the reference plane. Anybody seen that? There's a few family templates that have that. Do you wish you could get rid of that 0 dimension because you're type A personality like me? Here's a tip. If you draw a reference plane, switch that dimension to that reference plane, and then delete the reference plane. That's how you delete the dimensions that it won't let you delete. Type A personality. I will find a way to make it do what I want it to do. Okay? So that's a little tip there. It won't let me delete the reference lines. I will be stuck with those forever. But just a little side note, when you go through, that is a way to do it. So create family templates for your office for what you guys think you will need. Now, the other thing on that is not only create a family template, but I did say, hey, maybe you're going to be starting with the out-of-the-box. Or maybe you've added some families and somebody went in and purged out all the filled regions. You're like, oh crap, I need the filled regions back. And then you go rename it. You don't spell it the same way, etc. So I will always keep a separate RFA file that has all my object styles as well as all the filled regions I want. I will also put the filled regions. I will put a filled region down for every single one of the hatch patterns in that family that I think I'm going to be using. The reason why I do this is somebody purged it out, or maybe I'm going to convert the out-of-the-box Autodesk one to it. Having this family open will allow me to be in a different family, go into the Manage tab, and transfer project standards. So I keep one for transferring project standards. So I'll come down here, I don't want the details file, I want my little detail transfer file, and then I can say, hey, maybe give me the line patterns, maybe give me the line styles, maybe give me the line weights and the object styles. So this will allow me to transfer all those fill patterns in, all the object styles in, to be what I wanted into the file that possibly got purged. It does not allow you to transfer filled regions, only the filled patterns. So if I were to do this, I should have done it with an out-of-the-box one, but if I were to do that and say, okay, that would be great, but when I went to the filled region tab, if somebody had purged them all, that's not great. When I go to filled regions, I would have like everything purged out and I'd have solid. So what I do is, and the reason why I have that file is I go in there. By the way, does everybody know Control-Shift-Tab tabs backwards through your views? Sorry, just to like to tell everybody what I'm doing. So then I can come in here and just simply grab the filled regions, copy those to the clipboard, go back to my other file and paste those from the clipboard. So now when this has been all set up and done, I now added the filled regions in here, as well as the fill patterns, as well as the object styles, etc. So my other little tip is on your server, keep one called my detail transfer file, which has all of that stuff set up inside of there. Okay? The other thing I did talk about, and I'm not going to get too much into this, but you'll also see that I have sitting here, I have these little journal files. I've talked about this. I don't think I've done it at AU, at other conferences, where you can actually use journal files to change things. So like I have a journal file to rename all the out-of-the-box Autodesk detail lines to something that I chose. So take the object style and change it from called thin, medium, and thick to solid 07 or whatever I wanted it to be. So I run a little journal file on those as well to make sure those object styles start getting where I want. So that, I didn't really put that in the handout, but that is another way you can start getting that stuff going too, is using journal files for updating a lot of that data. Okay? So start with your detail template file. Get one set up. Go through what you need to do in there, and then it's really starting to get into just create what you need to do. For me, I'm very big on line-based detail components. So you saw the one where I've got gypsum board, concrete, and I always start to say when you're doing this, start with one like, gee, I'm going to start with a wood stud on the side view. Put the angles in there, put your filled region there. I'll do that here in a second, and then just do a save as and change the hatch pattern out and change the name. So that's one of the big things for me is I also have one that started with basically just a filled region going through here. And then I just do a save as, now it's steel. Now I do a save as, now it's wood. Save as, change the hatch pattern, now it's concrete. So once you get one set, you can usually do a save as rather quickly and start busting through a lot of those line-based detail components that you would want. So getting into that with some of the things that I've got going and said, all I'm going to do is just go in here and create a filled region. Like I said, choose the one you would want it to be. Right now, I'm just going to say, hey, great, this is going to be a CMU is terrible. That's a terrible idea. We'll just go through and say this is going to be gypsum wallboard. All right? So I'm going to come up here and choose the right object style, and I'm going to do invisible line first. I'm literally just going to draw one on the end here, and then one on the other end over here, hitting the padlock as I go. And then I'm going to make this one, I think I'm solid 5. I don't know. I might have to come back and change that. Pick this line here. Pick this line here. Now, the reason I wanted invisible at the end is you saw how when I created my detail components, I have the capability to turn the end lines on and off. So the filled region has to have those lines as invisible lines, right? So I'm going to hide that. And then what I do on top of that is I then just go create a line. I'm going to be using the same 05 solid line right on top of this reference line. Padlock it and padlock it over here. Okay? Then what I want to do to those is constrain them to the width values. So I'm going to use my align command. Grab that dot and padlock it. Grab that dot and padlock it. Did everybody also know that if you're using the align command and you hold control before you first click, you're basically switching it to multiple? So you don't have to remember to check or uncheck the multiple. You can just hold control and then hit your padlock and hold control and you're still in multiple alignment. Right? So I've got that set up. And then I'm going to grab this one, and I've already got parameters in here, I believe, for the visibility, and I will just go into the visible and say, gee, I wanted that to be the start line, and I want this one to be the end line. right? And then we'll go back and reset this. So now I've got that all set up. I will tell Revit to turn my preview visibility on, and then come in and say, gee, if I turn the start line off, is it doing what I want it to do? And if I turn the end line off, is it doing what I want it to do? So it's basically just building out a detail component like this, saving it, save as, save as, save as, save as, and you can really get through quite a few of these in an 8-hour time period. With one of my clients, I went through and probably did about 60% of what they needed for the one project in less than a day. So getting that set up, and maybe even doing that one as your filled region-based line type component, so when you do a save as, nobody's purged out all the filled regions you didn't want. Okay? Any questions on that so far? Beautiful. Okay, so that's great. We've got that. We're starting to set it up. But what about really starting getting into embedding the details and adding some more of the intelligence to it? So when we start looking at this inside of here, I've got this like brick component. Actually, I'm going to open up the weep component first. So I've got this weep component here, and I did talk about loading and nesting this inside of there. So if you're going to be taking one of these families and you're going to be nesting it into other families, you're going to want to make sure that this is set up to be shared. If you want to be able to tag a nested family, it doesn't matter if it's 2D or 3D, that family has to be shared. So I'm going to make sure that my little weep family here is set to be shared. You're also going to see that I've got like a depth and a height parameter to it. These parameters, if they are being pushed into the host family, have to be instance-based parameters. So if you make a family shared, you cannot map those parameters into another family. So I'm going to make the parameters instance-based. I'm going to go through and open up my little brick family just to kind of show you why I'm doing this. So here's my brick family. It looks very similar. I'm going to go ahead and load this into the project, not the brick. I'm going to load the weep into the brick family. And then I'm going to place my little weep family somewhere. So a lot of people start when they're nesting families, make the mistake of trying to align and lock like the stretchable grips to this. You're not going to want to align and lock the stretchable grips. What you want to do is select it. And then over here for like the brick height and brick depth, you're going to want to make sure you're hitting the secret hidden associate family parameter button, or if you're in the project, the secret hidden associate global parameter button to the like brick depth. Now you'll see that those went from arrows to dots. I'm also going to associate this to brick height. So now as the parameter for brick depth and brick height change over here, that's going to update that as we start going through here. Okay. Once I get all those associated, I think I also have mortar size in here I should associate as well. Once I get all those associated, now I can just use the align command and align it to the reference planes inside of there. So I always do my family mapping first, and then I come over here and say, okay, let me align that there, let me align that there, and now that's been set to be able to push those values through. So again, if this changes to be some bizarre number, that was not what I hit. It'll start updating with the other one. And since that was shared, that's what gives me the tagging capabilities. Okay? Then the last thing for me on something like this is to then go to the visibility parameter and associate that to a visibility parameter. So if there's not one created, so again, I'm hitting the secret hidden button of associate family parameter. I'm going to say, not OK, I'm going to say new button. I'm going to say weep. When did my caps lock get turned on? And I like that in this case to be an instance-based parameter, and I also personally group all of my visibility parameters under graphics. It's just personal preference. I say OK. So now I've nested that family in to get what I want it to do. Okay? So I don't know, there's nothing rocket science there. The key thing there is shared, so it can be tagged. Okay? Any questions on that? It's hard to see. Beautiful. So then the other thing I like to talk about is let's start adding some more information inside of there. And this is going to be an example. I'm going to start closing some of this. I have way too much open here in a minute. For structural engineers. So what I like to do, and you'll kind of start to see back in the project here. I'm done with that one. So back in the project here, I'm going to make something ridiculous here. Like I'm going to go ahead and do spacing at 0.5 of an inch. And that's not what I thought this one had the code built into it. But what I like to do and start some of these is start building in code information. So I want to build inside of there, if somebody did something, it's not usually that somebody's going to put 0.5 of an inch inside of there. What I like to do inside of there is start building code information. So for like in this case, my young EITs. So I build in information, in this case, it's just a filled region, where I'm starting to add some of that code. So in this in this family here, stretch this out. I'm so glad 2018 remembers how you stretch this in a session. Anybody else, like for me, jump for joy when they saw that? Literally, I jumped for joy. People looked at me weird. I went home in shame. So inside of here, I have this thing in here called check. And basically, I'm building inside what's happening to that family. So I'm building in code information into the detail components. So if I get a young EIT, or if the design changes from like a number 6 rebar to number 14 rebar, yeah, because that happens in the real world, the spacing might get too close for that type of scenario. So building some of this information inside of there when you get into it. So I'm going to come down here and say preview visibility on, and you're going to see my little red filled region goes away. But what I'm going to come inside of here and do is build in and just say, again, I'm going to go ahead and do my spacing at like 1/2 of an inch. I'm going to hit apply, and then I should be able to see the beautiful little red region. You can't because the black is so close, but you can see it in the corners over here, that the red filled region came in saying, you know what, you are breaking code. You're not allowed to do that. You're getting too close to the requirements. So going into families, building some of that information into it to flag your user of this isn't something that's possible. This isn't things that you can go through and set up. Now, with that, it's just getting into conditional statements, adding in the code. So like in this case, you can see I've got the bar concrete minimum. So I'm basically just taking the minimum distance using the formula for it's the diameter times 1. I don't remember. I wrote this a while ago with the help of a structural engineer. And then basically down here, just basically saying if this value is greater than that value, turn my little checkbox on. You guys probably can't see that in the back. Let me zoom in. So if this value is greater than that value, turn my little checkbox on. So you have the capability to just build some of the stuff inside of there. The other thing that I've done in this thing is I don't want somebody to come in here and change the type comments. Consistently for me, I want reinforcing to always be called the number of the bar with the word bar. So you can also build in formulas getting into the size of an if statement. So I built a formula in saying if the size is 3, in quotes, number 3 bar. If the size is 4, quotes, number 4 bar, etc. So I've got this very, very, very long nested conditional statement here. Scroll across. Nested if statement here, basically going through every single one of the sizes to go through. And if somebody types in and goes into a bar and makes one a size that doesn't exist, like a size 3, it basically comes out with text that says this size is non-existent. So the tag will change to a size that's non-existent. I say that because actually I was at one client's office and somebody actually was using like a number 12 bar. It's like, yeah, that doesn't work. That doesn't exist. So building information to where the tag can come up to as well if you want to hard code and lock that down. And if anybody was in the session over there, talked about using lookup tables to do basically this exact same thing without using an if statement. So if you really want to be crazy, you can use a lookup table to fill out this information as well. So just start thinking about things like that too. Okay? So building that intelligence, adding that information inside of it. And then the last thing that I like to also show here is kind of one of my little tips behind the scenes since we can't. Let me get back to the project environment. So the last little thing I have on here too is there's some tools in Revit like the insulation tool. Somebody use architects, I guess. And the architects use the insulation tool out of Revit. It's really, really cool. But it's like a repeating detail. You can't tag it. You can't keynote it. So personally for me, I rarely use the repeating detail component. I did here to show an example of this. So I've got this repeating detail component. If I were to go tag this repeating detail component, no, I don't want to save. The only thing I can tag on a repeating detail component is information like type. There is no type comments. There aren't comments that you can tag. There's no keynoting to a repeating detail component. So you can't really tag any of the information inside of there. I would love to be able to tab select the nested component inside of there and tag that. We can't do that either. So my little tip on that is if you're using the repeating detail component to do something, you then manually place one of them over the top of it. So you'll see I've basically done the same thing with the brick. This brick is using the repeating detail component, but if I need to tag it, I tagged it down here where I have individual bricks. Or I would take this brick and put it over the top so I could tag that one brick. So it's a downside, in my opinion, for detailing in Revit. But if you are using that, feel free to just put one of your repeating detail components over the top. Or better yet, go to, that's not what I wanted, go to this link on the Revit Idea Station and vote it up. Sorry, I did that at a previous conference, and I got about 10 people who voted. It's like, oh, man, I was hoping more people would vote it up. But yeah, so that is one of the other things when you start getting inside of there, too, is really start thinking about doing array parameters like you saw with the reinforcing for your repeating details. So a lot of times for me, I have a few different repeating detail components where they're not repeating details. It's a line-based detail component family with the nest in there that arrays it itself. I don't like that because I think those slow Revit down more than the repeating details, but it's the best solution I have for tagging purposes right now. Okay, and with that said, I got like 4 minutes left. I'll follow up for any questions, comments? Okay, before we get into that, because I know somebody's going to leave when the question happens, and I'm okay with that, please remember to fill out your surveys. That's how Autodesk ranks us. That's how some people get the little top-rated speaker badge. Also, if you guys want to heckle me on Twitter, there's my Twitter account, my blog, so anything you want there. But and then I'll go to questions. What was your question? So the question is, why type comments as opposed to the family name? Because my family name, my type name is going to be this. I could use the family name here, but when I start getting down into the family name, and you can do it however you want, family name would work fine. But when I start looking at like nominal cut lumber, a lot of times people in their family names will start getting into like, oh, I want to call this post tension FRT. They start getting really, really descriptive on the family names, and I don't want that to show up in the tag. So yes, family name is absolutely something you can use, but I see people really, again, based on the user base, duplicate this Fred's version. So now I got a tag 2x4 Fred's version because he was trying to do something and he wasn't sure if he should do it, and that gets repeated throughout the project. So for me, it's more about type comments than family name. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, so the question was, how do you implement this in a firm? Because this is going to take tons of time, basically. It takes tons of time. I mean, the way I always look at this to people is, especially if you're coming from AutoCAD, how many people in their AutoCAD drawings use sticky back details? Most people laugh when I say that. Like, why would you do that? Well, why are you trying to use AutoCAD details in Revit? You invested time into creating AutoCAD details, not using your sticky back details. You have to invest time and money inside of Revit. So like I said, the one client I went to quite a few years ago, they're like, look, we did all our details. They had been working on this for like 2 or 3 months. When I told them they did it wrong, they scrapped it all and hired me to start it. And I'm like, I really don't want to do all this. This is creating the content I love, putting the details together, whatever. They actually then hired somebody literally to just go through for their first 6 months. That is what they did. And I think at the time in that 6 months, they have over 600 detail components and over like 1,000 typical details drawn. So yes, it is an investment. I'm not saying it's not. But the first time you get a lawsuit because somebody called something out wrong, that paid for your investment. Or avoiding that lawsuit. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. Question in the back. Yeah. Sorry, what was the question? How about linked models? Come to my session tomorrow. No, for linked models, you can still tag through a linked model. So if there's there, but you can't see detail components in a drafting view. And that's my session tomorrow, talking about you can detail action plans and sections, and then you can link those into your projects. My session tomorrow is exactly about creating a detail file that you link into multiple different buildings. So it's kind of a very broad topic on linked files, but you still could tag if you did it, but you'd have to have those in a non-drafting view. Yeah, if it's a consultant's model, you're hosed because they're going to do it whatever they call it, whatever they want to call it, or they might be using shared parameters in them themselves. But if it's your file, then that's where you're going to start going through. Okay, I saw a question over here. Sorry, I'm going back and forth. Yes? So the question was keynotes versus type comments. So yes, you are correct. The keynote file is going to be base, but most of my clients are taking that keynote file and copying it to a project-specific folder anyway, so the keynotes then become project-specific. same as a type comment would basically be project specific if somebody changed it. If we decided that we wanted to use a lowercase x when calling out a 2x, then yes, I open up the family. For me, it's a type catalog. Change it to be a lowercase x in that type catalog. Now, future projects are going to be using it as a lowercase x when they use it. So there is a different discrepancy where I have to edit the family or the type catalog, reload that into my template if it's in the template, or my detail file if it's in there. So there is a little bit more of a work in that scenario when I'm doing type comments versus keynoting. Keynoting, I could change the keynote file. I still have to open up Revit in a template and point it to that keynote file to get it to change. So I don't know, in my mind, it's kind of one versus the other. Like I said, it's however you want to do it. I personally like type comments because I can add additional information. Okay, back over here. Yes? Where's the best place how to use a journal file? Download my presentation from Built Europe or email me and I can give it to you. Okay, yeah, question in the middle here. Sorry, it's really hard to see hands up with these lights glaring in my face. Oh, so the question is, if I want to have the details in a small scale section, like a wall section, as well as in here, do I use groups for that? I don't show them in a small scale sections. I know most people disagree with me in that. In the AutoCAD world, I would detail the crap out of it in my overall wall section, but I would hide all those layers. And then I would do a blow up that showed it. The question I always ask people is, okay, your wall section is at an 1/8 inch scale. Your floor plan is at an 1/8 inch scale. Are you showing the brick coursing in the floor plan? Why do you need to show the brick coursing in a section if you're not showing it at the same scale in a floor plan? In my mind, the wall sections are just, you know, they're kind of like a repository to get to call-outs to where you're going. But if you're going to do it, you have to use detail groups. You can actually go nest all the detail components into a detail component and put that on there and then still tag it out. But that would probably be unrealistic with details. I do that with normal families, but not with details. So if you want to reuse the detail in another project, since I've done this all as drafting views, you can just copy and paste the drafting view in. If it's over the top of the model, I'm not a big group fan because groups slow Revit down and groups are very buggy. If you wanted to just group it all to copy it to another project, I don't get. Because again, even if this was over the top of the model, if I go back to that other view, even if this is over the top of the model, if I need to copy all the detail components, I just say don't display the model. I do a selection window. I make sure I only have detail items. I copy it to the clipboard. I go back to the other file and I paste it. So you can still copy, paste, etc. to do that. That's my theory. Or if you really want to talk about this, so my session tomorrow was talking about nesting details to multiple projects. Several of my clients now, their typical detail file is done this way. They copy that to every project-specific folder, and their details are already linked into their building, and they open up that separate file to change the details as well. So that could be a possibility. It doesn't work for everybody. Some people love it. Some people are like, God, that's crazy, but that's another possibility as well. So I saw another hand over here, I thought. Nope, maybe not. All right, with that said, I have business cards if anybody wants, and I appreciate everybody sticking around. Thanks.